He beats me because he loves me. He promised never to do it again. She promised she would never slap me again. I thought I was gonna die. I have never been so scared for my life as I was that night when he attacked me. I'm jealous because I love you. You made me do it. You know I don't like when you do that, so it's not my fault. You provoked me. What happens in this house stays in this house. If you tell anyone, I will kill you. You'll never get away from me. I want to leave, but I can't. I'm staying because of the kids. If I leave, he'll take away my kids. If I leave, he'll call immigration. It's my fault he didn't mean it. It's my fault she didn't mean it. How many times have you heard these lines from a loved one? How many times have you prayed that your friend, sister, mother, aunt, brother, cousin, or neighbor would just wake up and finally leave? How many times have you ever thought about giving up on someone who you know is in an abusive relationship and continues to go back over and over and over again? Hello, I am attorney Lamont McNaught, and I'm an attorney based in Miami, Florida. In this video, we will explore one of the most painful issues, yet very important in many of our homes and communities, the painful scourge of domestic violence. Now, before we start, just a quick disclaimer. In this video, we will be discussing potentially painful topics that continue to affect many families throughout the country. So parental discretion is advised as this video discusses issues related to violence. Each year in America, nearly 10 million families are affected by family and domestic violence. In Florida in particular, the Florida Department of Children and Families, otherwise called DCF, reported that in 2020 alone, there were over 515 cases of domestic violence reported to the police. Of that 106,000 cases, only 63,000 cases plus resulted in an arrest. Nationally, over 1,500 victims lost their lives to domestic violence, with Florida alone claiming 200 of those cases. Domestic violence accounts for approximately 20% of all murders annually in Florida. In fact, in Florida, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience some form of domestic violence in their life. But before we dive further, let's get some basic definitions out of the way. The CDC, for example, the Center for Disease Control, defines domestic violence as physical violence, sexual assault, stalking, psychological aggression, etc., or other similar actions by a current or former intimate partner. Under Florida law, however, domestic violence is defined as any assault, aggravated assault, battery, aggravated battery, sexual assault, sexual battery, stalking, aggravated stalking, kidnapping, false imprisonment, or any criminal action that results in the physical injury or death of a family member or someone in our household, which is committed by another family member or somebody who lives in the same household. Typically, however, the victim and the abuser must live in the same home. But let's say, for example, in Florida, the parties have a child in common, then if they engage in acts of violence, that could be under the definition of domestic violence, and pretty much it mostly is. At the most basic level, battery, for example, a form of physical act of domestic violence, occurs when you touch someone in the state of Florida without their consent. Assault, however, occurs when someone does or says something that might cause any person to reasonably believe that they are imminently at risk of being harmed by someone who actually has the ability to inflict that harm. According to DCF, domestic violence consists of a pattern of behaviors that adults and adolescents use to control their intimate partners and establish power over them. In the US nationally, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men will experience some form of domestic violence. Unfortunately, most incidents of domestic violence go unreported. To make matters worse, every year domestic violence costs the US economy approximately $12 billion. That's an astronomical figure. Now, domestic violence occurs in every race, age group, culture, educational background, or religion. I say this to point out that no one group is responsible for the high number of domestic violence. Instead, this is a social and societal problem that reaches far and wide. Now, domestic violence can present itself in many ways, whether physical, economical, psychological, or emotional. For example, if I use threats, gaslighting, insults, coercion to control someone who lives with me or has a child with me, that may be domestic violence. Neglecting a child's basic needs such as their hygiene, nutrition, or clothing may also qualify as a form of domestic violence. Examples of physical violence, as I mentioned before, includes assault, biting, hitting, burning, choking, gagging, grabbing, kicking, punching, hair pulling, restraining, scratching, shaking, shoving, or even slapping someone. Now, having covered domestic violence on an extremely basic level, let's now switch to examining how domestic violence actually manifests. So, according to Benjamin Hausman and George Simeon, who wrote the Florida Domestic Violence Journal in the National Institute of Health, domestic violence typically occurs in three stages. The first phase, called the tension building phase. This is when the abuser becomes judgmental, temperamental, they get mad extremely fast. They can be triggered for even the simplest issues. In fact, in this phase, the abuser will frequently scream, they'll make threats, they'll even try to intimidate you or even throw tantrums like a child. Once the tension builds, then comes the second phase. This is the most violent phase. This is when all hell breaks loose. The second phase is called the explosive phase. And this happens when the abuser takes all that built up anger and actually manifests it in some form of violence, whether again physical, psychological, or emotional, or otherwise. Again, this can take the shape of hitting, punching, choking, slapping, or other kinds of violence. The last phase, which in my opinion is equally dangerous, is the honeymoon phase. Now, in the honeymoon phase, this is when the abuser typically apologizes. They might agree to get some counseling. Hell, they may even beg for forgiveness or even try to bring you some presents to try to sweeten you up or make you feel as if everything's going to be okay. Sometimes in the honeymoon phase, they may even promise to never do it again. But guess what? This only lasts until the next time you allegedly piss them off for whatever reason. This cycle can, and most time, causes victims to feel scared of saying or doing anything. If you're like me who interact with victims of domestic violence, they may even blame themselves for the harms that they suffer. In fact, I've personally heard victims say to me and tell me things like he beats me because he loves me. It's my fault why he beats me. I should have listened. The problem is that while being victimized, many victims actually start to believe this stuff. So if you learn anything from this video, I want to highlight some things to look out for to ensure that you nor anyone you know ever become a victim of domestic violence. Now on the screen to my right, you're going to see some common risk factors. These factors are important and they include many things, for example, as a change in employment, change in income, change in financial stability, pregnancy, adultery, drug use, alcohol abuse. There are many factors that could make domestic violence more prone. In fact, during the COVID-19 pandemic, domestic violence skyrocketed. Why I'm bringing this video to your attention now and why I'm bringing this legal trend to your attention now is because as the US economy is going through a weird phase where many people really and truly don't really know what's going to come next, but at the same time they're edging their bets to figure out what's next and what's best for their families. This economical situation may actually contribute to the increasing trend of domestic violence locally in the state of Florida and otherwise throughout the country. So therefore, we as a community must not only focus on how to punish domestic violence, but how to rehabilitate abusers. We have to break the cycle of domestic violence from the childhood stage by teaching students better dispute resolution tactics. We have to support leaders and initiatives who take serious approach to punishing and rehabilitating abusers. We have to support leaders and initiatives that empower victims to leave abusive situations. In fact, some of the first things I do whenever I'm helping a victim of domestic violence is to, one, get them secure shelter. Next is to get them financial independence, so that way they're not forced back into an abusive environment just for mere survival. Third, and definitely not least important, is to get them help so they don't feel as if they are the cause for the abuse. We need to support initiatives such as the organizations listed to my right again, who prioritize victim safety and independence from abuse. I also can't stress enough just how important it is for us to keep our eyes open and to call out every act of domestic violence. There is no shame in calling out domestic violence. In fact, there should be shame in concealing it. We need to encourage victims to leave abusive environments and to support them as they transition. In the case of many, many victims, especially the case of immigrants, we have to educate them of their rights. In fact, on this particular issue, I have a personal bias from my own experience. When I was a kid growing up in America, especially during middle school, I remember on multiple occasions I used to rush through my classwork in my computer lab class just so I could take the last few minutes of class to research Georgia's laws about domestic violence. Now imagine me as a kid researching different laws that on paper should protect you. But then when you call the police and try to invoke these rights, you're told, it's just a family issue. Try to work it out. Or it's not that serious. Or in my case, he's a veteran. He'll get in trouble. Too many times I've personally been told that if I reported my domestic violence experience when I was a child, I would have either been taken away by Child Protective Services and never seen my mother again by law enforcement. I was told we'd be deported back to Jamaica with nothing. We were made to feel as if we had no choice but to literally sit in a situation of violence for over 7 years. Now imagine if the police actually removed the abuser from the home. Imagine if the police actually informed victims like me, for example, or my mother, or other persons who are immigrants, that, hey, there's actually a path to residency if you are experiencing violence. Imagine if families weren't threatened by law enforcement officers of being separated into DCF and foster care if they sought help. I, like many people, would have avoided years of domestic violence. So in this video, as I said before, if you see something, say something. We have to tell people, we have to tell our neighbors or friends, if you see something, say something. Domestic violence is never acceptable under any circumstance. We have to also stop telling ourselves, and we have to tell others, to never accept blame for being a victim of violence. Violence is never your fault. The fact that you happen to find yourself in a situation with someone who is unable to communicate or articulate their own frustration, their own past, or deal with their own demons is not an excuse for you to sit down and be abused. Whether physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, or otherwise. You may have to also consider some other alternatives, for example, as developing a safety plan. A safety plan, for example, could include some similar and very interesting concepts, for example, or ideas like avoiding arguments in small rooms, developing an escape route, ask friends and neighbors to call the police if they hear suspicious noises, arrange a code word for children, friends, or family, so if they hear you use these words, they know you're seeking help. We have to teach kids how to use the phone to call police officers and to seek help. We have to change how law enforcement officers approach domestic violence, to stop being a situation where they're trying to protect the abusers, to actually bringing the abusers to justice, but also bringing them into a system that can offer them rehabilitative help. Because unfortunately, which I had to also accept, my abuser was a victim of domestic violence himself. And he was only perpetrating things that he learned as a child and things that were done to him in his own situation. If we break the chain, trust me, we can see changes. We have to also make sure that when we are helping people transition, that we not only just give them, basic assistance and give them information, but actually help them seek legal assistance to get things, for example, like restraining orders. We have to help them to not only find resources, for example, like housing or some stipends to survive, but to actually rehabilitate themselves so they can survive, provide for themselves, provide for their children, and escape that situation. And finally, we have to approach domestic violence from a different perspective of rehabilitation, not only just punishment. Because many times all we do is just piss the abuser off, and when they get out, they just do even worse. Domestic violence is a serious problem, and it's going to take a united effort by all of us to ensure that we're not only our brothers and sisters keepers, but that we speak up, we say something, and we get help when needed. Thank you for watching this video. Please hit the like and subscribe button. And again, feel free to reach out to us and tell us any topics you want us to cover. Here at Legal Trends, our main objective is to ensure that we pass on knowledge to help you, your community, and your families make the best decisions and to understand the legal landscape around you. Now, nothing here in this video is offering legal advice, but if you do need a lawyer, seek legal help. And if you're uncomfortable, reach out to our office at intake@miglegal.com and we will help find help for you if necessary.